Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric Nerding series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. When I did the January news episode, I asked if people wanted an updated 2024 controller guide because a lot of new options have come onto the market, and it was pretty much a resounding yes. That's what we're going to be doing today, talking about the best controllers used for MiSTer, wired and wireless, how to use original hardware, how to use all of the different new adapters on the market, and how to get the best experience out of pretty much every single core. For you are involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But there are an absolute metric crap ton of ways to use controllers on your MiSTer, and an even bigger metric crap ton of controllers you can pick from. Now be aware that there's pretty much 3 ways to get controls into your MiSTer. You can go via USB protocol on a USB-A port, you can go over a serial connection on the user I/O port, which is USB shaped but not USB protocol, or you can go in via a wireless protocol with USB adapters. Those are going to be the 3 primary ways to get controls into your MiSTer FPGA device, whatever device you're using. USB is obviously going to be the easiest. I'll leave a link to the Bluetooth adapter I use down below. I've had great success with this, and while I primarily use my MiSTer with a wired connection and definitely always test with one, for couch gaming this has proven to be very effective. So for the wireless folks out there, this is the one adapter I can recommend. It's like $12 on Amazon right now. I will leave a link below. It's not an affiliate link. I make nothing for doing it. I'm just here to help you guys. So wireless is an option. You can pull some latency guides to see how much it's going to add, if anything. Now if you just want to grab a common controller and start playing the majority of the cores available, there are a ton of options here from Microsoft, from Nintendo, and from Sony. This is pretty much what I believe like maybe 75 to 80% of you use. Now I'm going to show you the PlayStation 5 controller in a minute, but I know not everyone owns those. The PlayStation 4 controller is an absolute gem when it comes to dealing with MiSTer FPGA. Pretty much outside of Nintendo 64 or the Sega Saturn core, this just works 100% of the time. And before you make a remark on dust, yes, I get it. I have an old house with radiator heat, and dust is just a problem. It's part of the channel. You guys can hang with it. But the PlayStation 4 controller is something that I feel like most people will have. It works absolutely spectacularly. But if you are a Microsoft owner, then the Xbox Series X controller, the Xbox One X controller are all going to be outstanding. I prefer the Series X because of that D-pad, how it is basically just one disc. And this is going to give you all of the buttons you need to control all of the on-screen displays, your dual analog, things such as that. And if you are a Nintendo fan and you have a Switch Pro controller, this is another one that I use a lot of times for testing. Actually, when I am just capturing footage, I leave it next to me because I don't play my Switch near as much as my other consoles. But any of these controllers are going to be absolutely perfect for most of the cores. And if you do have a PlayStation 5, then the PlayStation 5 controller is another awesome option. I think this is probably the most comfortable controller Sony's ever developed. So any of these options right here are going to be perfect for you. They're going to give you all of the shoulder buttons you need for stuff like the PlayStation 1 core. You can play Super Nintendo on these. Anything with 4 buttons, a D-pad, analogs, and 2 triggers are going to be outstanding. But now let's get to the big elephant in the room, Nintendo 64. The controller for this console was absolutely different than anything else we'd ever seen up until that point in time, and honestly no one's really tried to replicate it. I'm sure that's because people either seem to love it or hate it. And because the Nintendo 64 core is the new hotness as far as MiSTer FPGA is concerned, let's talk about how to control this specific core so that you get the best experience out of it. Because if you take a look at an original Nintendo 64 controller, you have these 4 diamond buttons, the A and B button, as well as start, analog, and a D-pad. You're not really going to see this configuration on many controllers whatsoever, and then you have 2 shoulder buttons as well as the Z button. So honestly, none of the standard console controllers from this current generation are going to be able to accommodate something like that. Now we do have the Retro Fighter Brawler 64 NSO controller, which takes the same Nintendo 64 button layout and puts it into a more modern controller. I've been testing absolutely every single Nintendo 64 core on this controller. I absolutely love it, whether it is wired or wireless, and I'm usually wired to be honest with you. It has all the buttons you need to control the on-screen display in the core menu, all of the buttons you need to play Nintendo 64 effectively. It just covers you 100% of the time, and I actually love that it replicates the Z button on both shoulders there, so you have an option either way. You've got the buttons on the back, it's USB-C. It really just does cover you for basically anything you would possibly need Nintendo 64 related. And the analog controller even has those gates right there. Now if you want to use your original Nintendo 64 controllers, MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt totally has you covered. This is an absolutely outstanding way of converting the controller over to USB, and this doesn't just work for Nintendo 64, it works for basically every original controller you could possibly think of. And the greatest part is it's got so many many different adapters for it. I'll just pop in a DB15 adapter for this illustrative purpose. You can use this to adapt your original controllers to pretty much any single port you could possibly imagine. And the great thing is, if you don't want to use USB, if you want to go into serial with Snac or Snax, then MiSTer Addons has you covered as well. There's so many different options to get your original controllers in, and I know we're just talking about Nintendo 64 right now, but this is an awesome way to use your original hardware. Now do be aware that the Nintendo 64 NSO controller made by Nintendo is an awesome option as well, but it seems like they have huge stock issues on that. And with these type of adapters, the sky is the limit. All you need to do is basically get a lead with the right port on the end, and you can convert almost anything over to a USB or a serial protocol. This allows you, if you have a gigantic collection of original controllers, to pretty much use whatever you could possibly imagine. I've got an absolute metric crap ton of these things in my desk drawer that I use when I'm testing individual cores, so you can pretty much pick whatever you want when it comes to Snax adapters or Reflex Adapt, and bring your original controllers over to MiSTer FPGA with absolutely no latency issues whatsoever. It is an awesome option for people to have. But let's talk about arcade games and arcade cores, the things that you're going to want to bring an arcade stick to the party for. Stuff like Neo Geo, I absolutely need to, at a minimum, have a good D-pad, and if I get my druthers, I'm going to have an arcade stick. And there's a ton of different ways to do that as well, because there's so many amazing arcade cores. All of these games would have been played in the arcades on a large control panel with an arcade stick and big buttons, and we want to be able to do that on MiSTer FPGA. So the first recommendation I have is any decent USB arcade stick that is going to work on something like an Xbox or PC. Pretty much all of them are going to work on MiSTer FPGA. I used the Neo Geo Arcade Stick Pro and I modified it just because I could put the controls I wanted in, and I got it on a deal. But if you want arcade perfect controls, you want an arcade stick. USB is going to be the easiest protocol to deal with, but there's other ways to do this as well. But on the Arcade Stick Pro here, outside of the USB, you have so many different buttons on the side that we can then map to stuff like the on-screen display for the home button so you can switch your games. And there's different toggles here as well to make it work in different modes. Now, I have not tested every single arcade stick out in the world. I bought this to modify for a video, and it's become pretty much my go-to arcade stick for any arcade cores on MiSTer. But let's say you have an older arcade stick, you have a Neo Geo stick itself, or anything else that uses a DB15 protocol, which would have been very popular back in the day. We also have multiple ways to get that into MiSTer, and this is my custom home build stick, which I love as well. We can use something like Reflex Adapt, or we can use something like Bootsector's new DB15 Neo Geo adapter. This is new to the market. He sent me this, and it should be available to buy as this video goes live, but it gives you a 4-player DB15 input that you can use wired or wirelessly with MiSTer FPGA. This is an awesome thing. I've tested it thoroughly across both wired and wireless, and it's just 100% worked for me the entire time. So it is an option if you want to bring those older sticks across the board to MiSTer FPGA. You got Bootsector's stuff, you got MiSTer Addons, and you got the Snac Adapters. So many different ways to get those original old school arcade sticks into MiSTer. Let's say you don't have the space for an arcade stick, or you don't want to buy something really expensive because they are not cheap. Well, I suggest highly you get the 8-bit DOE Neo Geo CD controller. I did a review on this and it was one of my best viewed videos of that month. This thing is just straight up gold. It has enough buttons to control your MiSTer on-screen display. It has 4 buttons that are going to be really useful for Neo Geo. Now on the arcade side of things with Capcom on a 6-button layout, you can use the shoulders, it'll be fine, but it's not as good as an arcade stick. Now pretty much for everything else arcade related, this is going to be amazing, and even stuff like the Super Nintendo core, this is now the controller I use. But let's talk about the Sega Saturn, because that also has a unique button layout. It's going to have 6 buttons on the face as well as 2 shoulder buttons, and we do have some options there as well, but pretty much the Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch controllers aren't going to be the best suited to get the original control scheme going. And there's so many awesome games on Sega Saturn, and there's so many new cores coming out from SRG 320, you definitely should be playing this if you haven't. Now my recommendation is still going to be the Retrobit Sega Saturn controller. I know some people have had some issues with this. It seems like there was a bad batch out there, so definitely buy from a vendor that you can return from, somebody like Amazon, but mine has been rock solid. It gives me all of the buttons I need everywhere I need it. Now I do have a Saturn adapter as well, so I can go in via USB or via serial on original controllers, but it is a great option. And as far as the TurboGrafx core is concerned, Again, I think you should just be using a Snac or MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt or the 8-bit DOE TurboGrafx controller. This is something where I really just feel like the button layout matters a supreme amount. And of course for original controllers, I'm not going to show you every single thing that works with MiSTer FPGA. If it's an original controller and it works for your console with MiSTer Addons Reflex Adapt, with Snac Adapters, Snax Adapters, you're going to be able to bring absolutely every single thing into your MiSTer. But that's my 2024 controller guide recommendations, whether you're using original stuff from Nintendo, Microsoft, or Sony that's modern. If you want to go over via Snax, Snaps, or USB adapter with MiSTer add-ons or some of the Bootsector stuff, whether you want to use USB arcade sticks or DB15 stuff. And I get that there's a ton of other controllers on the market, I just don't own absolutely everything, and I can't spend the money to test every controller ever made. But if you use the controllers in this video and you grab the devices I showed, you're going to be able to control everything on MiSTer all the time. For that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.